Elliott Henshaw, my first guest on this beautiful podcast. How are you, man? Thanks for coming here today.
My pleasure, mate. Thanks for asking me. I'm all right. I'm a bit wired at the moment. I got back home from a gig last night at 3 o'clock in the morning. So it's I'm a bit. I've just had my first coffee of the day, just to keep me going.
Wow, that's pretty cool, man. Busy as ever.
Busy as ever, yeah.
Nice. So I wanted to start, by telling you, I don't know if I ever told you this story, but how I actually managed to get in touch with you 10 years ago now. So as you know, I moved to London almost 10 years ago, and I didn't know anyone back then. And basically, I started researching, great people to meet, because I wanted to start meeting people, and the first person I contacted was you. The first person I contacted. Yes.
Okay. Sorry,
you're my first. And I mean, what can I say? Like, since then, you've been such a great guy, great friend. I love you. I have to say it. So.
Thank you. Feelings mutual.
Yeah. So obviously, thanks for being here on this podcast, video podcast, as you can see. I wanted to ask you about how did you get into drumming? Like, could you share the story of how you fell in love with this beautiful instrument and what it means to you?
So for me, I was always into music from a really early age. My mum actually used to tell me that when I was 2 or 3 years old, they had an old record player that you would stack records up and they would drop down and play one after the other. And you could close the lid on this record player and it would sit on the floor. And apparently when I was 2 or 3 years old, I used to lie on the floor with my head on the record player, just listening to the music constantly. So I guess that from an early age got me into music. I was just, obviously really enjoyed music. My mum, she was not a musician, but she loved a nice eclectic range of stuff. But she was always into music that had a good drum beat to it or featured the drums somewhat. Not so much jazz, but more on the rock and roll kind of things. So I was listening to music like a tune called Black Betty by Ram Jam, which was in the it was released in the 70s and had a couple of drum breaks in the middle of it. And then there was also another drummer from America called Sandy Nelson, who used to release drum solo records in the 60s. Things like Drums Are My Beat and Let There Be Drums, and they were basically solos throughout the whole, with a little bit of bass and guitar joining in occasionally. So my mum's listening to all that in the house. Coupled with that, my dad, when he was younger, he used to play in a 50s rock and roll band. He was the lead singer and rhythm guitarist. And so he was always he stopped doing that when he met my mum. He was only ever semi-pro local gigs, but he always used to be playing the guitar at home. I remember weekends where I'd always hear him singing along to rock and roll tunes, Bill Haley, Buddy Holly, Little Richard, those kind of things. So I grew up in a house. It's very kind of stereotypical, musician story. I grew up in a house full of music, but actually the first instrument that I learnt at school was the violin. When I was 7 years old in my primary school, I really recollect them offering two choices. You could learn piano or you could learn violin, and I think I don't know why I went for violin. Looking back, if I had my time again, I'd have gone for piano because my skills on the keyboard are terrible and my knowledge of harmony and whatnot. But what I found playing the violin was I had a really good ear for it, in that my violin teacher would play a tune and I could pretty much play it back straight away. I had good recall on melody. But I wasn't great at the academia side of it, and I couldn't really read music. I wasn't really interested in learning to read music and doing grades and stuff, even though on violin I did get to grade 4. But I just used to learn the tunes parrot fashion. I always struggled on the scales, and I was nowhere with the sight reading exercises. But for me, it was kind of the academic side of it took away from the enjoyment. I just wanted to play music. I didn't want to get into the nitty gritty of crotchets, quavers, and semi-quavers, and all that kind of stuff. And I carried on playing the violin till I was about 11. But when I was about 9, through my dad's influence of listening to rock and roll music, early 50s rock and roll, I started playing the saxophone. I wanted to, because a lot of those Little Richard records had saxophone solos in them, and I loved it. It was so exciting, the sound. So I asked my parents, can you get me a saxophone? And they found a second-hand alto sax, which they bought me when I was about 9 or 10 years old. And I said to them, I don't want lessons on this. I don't want to get into the academic side of it. I just want to play along to Little Richard records at home. And my dad used to arrange music nights where his friends from his old band used to come round. So his sax player would come round and his bass player, and I'd play a bit of sax. But at the same time, I was also, when I didn't know the tune on sax, I'd get an old shoebox out or a Tupperware, and I'd play. One of my dad's old drummers had given me a pair of sticks, and I just used to tap along to the music on a shoebox when my dad and his friends were playing. I've got some old recordings somewhere of that, so it's quite amusing. But
I'd love to hear that.
No, you wouldn't. My dad always says, and I do remember this, he always says that he started me off with the drumming thing because he showed me the difference between playing on 1 and 3 and 2 and 4. So really early days, he was like, you play the backbeat on the 2 and 4. You never clap on 1 and 3, like a lot of British audiences always do, which winds me up. So that I wasn't at that point. I was just doing that to get involved. What I wanted to do was play the sax, and through playing the sax and learning the sax just in my bedroom, I got into jazz quite quickly because obviously the saxophone is very heavily featured in jazz. And then one day in November 1986, my dad said, there's an American jazz band coming to our local theatre. I've got us some tickets. So me and my mum and my dad, and I think my sister was there as well, even though my sister's not really into music. We all went out for the night to watch this American jazz band, and it was the Buddy Rich Band. And that changed everything. It was like I came out of there not interested in anything else but playing the drums. It was quite a night, and I really do remember it. I just remember I had no idea who he was. I had no idea about who he was in the drumming community and how revered he was, but I just knew that it was something special. And so that was it. I became drum obsessed, and really I was 11. I was very lucky to catch Buddy live because he died 6 months after that in April 1987. So I caught him right at the end, but he was still playing. I mean, unbelievable. And I found on YouTube a bootleg of that concert. So I've got the actual audio knocking around of that first concert that I saw. And so that was 11 years old. And then really, my parents didn't want to invest in a drum kit. That's a heck of a thing to buy a child of 11. And so I didn't really play on my first drum kit, even though I was listening to Buddy Rich stuff as much as I could get my hands on in those days. You've got to remember there was no YouTube, there was no internet. You bought records, vinyl really, and cassettes. So I was trying to get as much of that as possible with my pocket money. But it was only when I was about 12 or 13 in my high school. Our high school didn't have a drum teacher at the time. But there was a school drum kit, and I remember sneaking into the music practice room of a lunchtime and just sitting down. And because I'd been watching drummers on TV, I'd been watching a show called Top of the Pops, which you could see the drummers playing. So I'd worked out that the right hand plays on the hi-hat and the left foot operates the hi-hat pedal. And I'd just been practicing on my hands and knees playing these very simple rock beats. So when I sat down at a drum kit, when I sneaked into the, or snuck, what's the word there? Sneak? How can you tell me?
Sneaked. I guess.
Who knows? Who knows? Um, I went in there and I could play. I sat down and I could play. I had the coordination to play some basic beats, and because I had a feel for music as well, I knew where the fill should be. I knew 8-bar phrases, 4-bar phrases, that kind of thing. And then the music teacher came in, obviously heard me playing, and I thought I was going to get a detention or something for being in there and playing without permission. But he said, I didn't realise we had any drummers in the school. What are you doing on Friday night? We've got a school wind band concert. We need a drummer. Do you want to do it? I'm like, yeah, of course. So that was that. That Friday night I played in the wind band, and after that I joined the school jazz band and the big band. And so really from day one I was playing in bands because I wasn't having lessons. There was nobody to teach me. I was just teaching myself. Which, I picked up a few bad habits like you do. I didn't know how, I didn't know anything about drum terminology. I didn't know rudiments. I didn't know anything. But the way it used to work back then was the band would play a new tune. I'd listen to it in rehearsals, and then I'd just make up my own part and play, and it always seemed to kind of work out. And that was it for the rest of my school time. That was 13 through till 18, and then so I'm rabbiting on here. Is this the sort of stuff you want?
It's fine. It's fine.
And then, so then it gets to 18, and you've got to go. Well, what are you going to do after school? Is it like you're going to go to university? I'd already started teaching younger students at school in my lunch breaks because the music teacher had realised that once I left school, they were going to have no drummer again because nobody was giving drum lessons at school. So he asked me to teach in my lunch break. So I was making money. My lunch times were spent teaching first and second year, third year students how to play the drums so that when I left...
And that's while you were in college?
While I was at school, while I was at high school.
Ah.
Yeah. So,
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was great. So I was, I can't remember what I was charging, but it was more than my pocket money, I can tell you that. And so then I didn't know what I wanted. At this point, because I had nobody mentoring me, nobody teaching me, I didn't even really know that drumming as a career was an option for me. It was just something that I loved doing. And then I had to, sort of go, well, I could go to university, but I wasn't into academia, maths, English, all that. I got good GCSEs, I got a few A levels, but nothing crazy, not great results. And so I was playing football a lot at the time, and I got injured, and I had some physiotherapy on my leg, and I was fascinated about how the physiotherapist worked out what was wrong with my leg. So I thought, well, maybe I should do that. So I applied to, or wrote to Salford University in Manchester because somebody had recommended them for physiotherapy courses. And they wrote back and said, yeah, we offer these. And they sent me a list of all the courses they offer, along with some other courses that they did at this place. And one of them was a BA Honours in band musicianship. And I was like, well, that's interesting. What's this? So I did a bit of reading about it. And it was a course, it was a music course, but it was all about performance, arranging and composing. The thing that always put me off doing music as a degree at college was having to write essays about dead composers. And a lot of them in those days, this is 1993, there wasn't the jazz element covered or the popular music covered. It was all classical, and I don't play percussion, I don't play timpani and xylophone and glockenspiel. I don't do any of that. So this one,
I know you do a little bit of that though.
Yeah, a tiny bit when I'm
here and there.
But so I sort of got some information about the course, and it turned out that once you'd done your first year, you could choose either wind band, brass band, or big band. Now, at that time, and still, I was obsessed with big bands because of the Buddy Rich thing, and that's kind of what I was listening to most of all. So I was like, well, I've got to apply for this. So I went and auditioned, played a bit of drums, did a little bit of keyboard. I could ham fist my way through a couple of things on the piano, really basic stuff. But I think my drumming got me an unconditional offer, because still at this time I couldn't read music. I was a self-taught player. So I got into that university, and that's where it kind of took off for me, because I went there not with an idea of this is going to be my career. It was kind of like, well, if nothing else, I'll have a good time for 4 years doing something I love, and then I'll be able to get a job because I've got a degree. You know, I can say to any potential employer, I've got a degree. And then started from there, really. You know, met like-minded musicians and made loads of connections and started doing paid gigs, and it was like, oh okay, I'll do this then. I'll do this for a living. And I in my first year there, I taught myself to read. I had to. I wanted to join the college big band, and I auditioned in my first year and didn't get it because I couldn't read music. They needed somebody that could turn up to rehearsals and sight read the charts. So my first year, I absolutely just went down the line of teaching myself to sight read. Auditioned in my second year, got the college big band gig in my second year, and then it was about halfway through that year that I got spotted by a musician who was booking a drummer for a chap called Andy Pryor, who at the time was a big name in big band music in the UK. He was a singer, still is, and he was kind of like a British Michael Bublé, let's say. He was doing a lot of television, a lot of touring, and I got that job. And so in my sort of last year and a half of college, I was doing loads of touring and television stuff, and that's kind of where it went from there. So that's a long way of saying how I got a start.
It's good though. It was very, very meticulous.
Yeah.
So would you say that the Andy Pryor gig is your first big gig?
Yeah, definitely. At the time I was playing in function bands and playing in pubs and playing with jazz bands, just local stuff. But that, you know, he was a big deal back then. He was making a lot of waves, and I remember my first year with him, we probably did about 50 dates, you know, up and down the UK, and quite a few TV shows, a couple of radio things. And then in my second year with him, he got signed up by a production company, and we did about 150 odd dates throughout that year, travelling up and down the UK. We recorded an album. You know, it was a big deal. It was a big deal.
I wonder, like, obviously, you know, going from playing, you know, like simple gigs like functions and pubs and bars, from something like that when you're still in college, there must have been like a very steep learning curve. Like, is there any takeaways that you could share from that experience?
Well, yeah, because I think when you're that age now, you got to remember at that time I was like 20, 21, something like that. I'd not had anyone ever telling me how to play this yet. Well, I say that when I got to university, that was the first time I started having one-to-one lessons with a fantastic teacher in Manchester called Steve Gilbert, and so he was the first guy to actually start kind of preparing me for a life as a professional musician, because what he did in our one-to-one lessons, we had an hour a week with him, and he's still a really good friend of mine. He's an absolutely wonderful human being and a killer player, like really good player. But our lessons, we did a bit of playing, but he clocked that I had quite a few things down. But really, a lot of what we did in our one-to-one lessons was talking, you know, how to deal with certain situations being a professional musician, how to get along with people, how not to be too pushy, how not to, you know, all those kind of things that you kind of have to learn by mistake, by making mistakes. And so, yeah, he was really important. When I told him that I'd got that Andy Pryor gig, you know, I was coming to him every week and saying, "This has happened. How do I deal with this?" And he was great on that side of things. But I did have to rein a couple of things in. I had to stop. You know, I'd picked up some bad habits. You've got to remember, I whenever you play, when you're that age and you're playing with mates in a jazz band or in a function band or playing at weddings, there's no kind of band leader, there's no star artist whose name's on the poster. You kind of do your own thing, and sometimes the way you play might be a little bit inappropriate for the music, but no one's going to say anything. You know, it's you just do your thing. But in about my third or fourth gig with Andy Pryor, he sort of called me into his dressing room after the show, and he said, I really like your playing. He says, but if you carry on playing the way you're playing, I'm going to have to let you go. I'm going to have to fire you. And I'm like, oh, right. What? He said, every number is like a drum solo. It's like what you're playing is getting in the way of my vocals. And that, you know, that was a big wake-up call for me, because I was coming from somebody who the big band music I was listening to was Buddy Rich, Louis Bellson, like drum featured kind of stuff. So every musical figure was set up by a crazy drum fill and all that. And what Andy Pryor said to me was, go and listen to a load of Frank Sinatra records with Irv Cutler on drums and see how he plays that music. And really, it stripped everything away from my playing, which was brilliant, because now the focus was on the swing and the groove, listening to the lyric or the melody, and if there was a chance to play a fill, play a very simple thing to catch into a figure, make life as easy as possible for not just the singer but the other musicians on stage. And with a big band, you've got 16 other musicians on stage. They don't need to hear a drum solo every time they're trying to play some swinging phrasing. They just need to hear good time. And that changed the way I played, really. And what I actually started doing then was, and I still do this, I try and learn the lyrics to the songs that I'm playing to, whatever genre of music. So whether it's a pop thing or a funk thing or a show thing, if I can sing along while I'm playing, if I want to play a fill and my drumming brain kicks in, if I can't play that fill because it gets in the way of what I'm singing, then it's definitely going to get in the way of what the singer's singing. So don't play the fill, just play the time. And that's, you know, the way changing that way of thinking kept me in that gig. And I did that gig for about 8 or 9 years until I moved to London, really.
That's amazing, honestly. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, obviously, in your career, you've done probably thousands of gigs, right?
Yeah.
Is there any way that you can share to help with the people maybe who have like stage fright or that get anxious when they get on stage? Especially, you know, you played a lot of West End shows, and both as a chair holder and as a deputy or sub, as our American friends would say. You know, those are very high pressure situations. It's not like depping on a function where maybe you know everyone in the band, and it's kind of like, yes, it is high pressure, but not as high pressure as having like a big show on your shoulders. Yeah. Like, is there any way that you think about preparation, both mentally and on the instrument, in order to prepare for a high pressure situation?
Obviously, I think in all the stuff I've done, I think the most fearful and the most pressure that we put on ourselves is when we're subbing or depping for somebody in a Broadway West End show situation, because it's a very lonely situation. You are the only person in that building that is doing this thing for the first time. Everyone else has been doing it night after night. Everyone in the pit is just going through the motions. You are on your own in your fear. And I remember the first proper big-time dep or sub that I did for somebody was for a guy called Mike Smith. After Buddy Rich, Mike was my hero. From about 15 years old, when I first heard him playing with the BBC Big Band, I used to listen to a radio show called Big Band Special every Monday night, 7:30 till 8. And he was the drummer with that band. It was a full-time big band at the time, and he is unbelievable. You know, he can sight read anything. His swing feel is unbelievable. He plays all the different styles. He's just a wonderful all-round drummer. And I got to know him through kind of stalking him, really. I used to go to all the gigs that the BBC Big Band did, you know, up north where I was living at the time. He started inviting me down to sit behind him at the BBC studios when they were recording all the radio shows, and I'd sit behind him and watch him sight read these charts, and that's how I learned to read. A big part of how I learned to read was by sitting behind him and looking at these parts while he read them and interpreted them. So over the years that, you know, from knowing him, eventually in the year 2000, he asked me to cover for him on a show called Witches of Eastwick, which was in the West End. Big show at the time. And I was on tour at that time with a show called Anything Goes, which is a George Gershwin show. And I sort of took a night off to go and sit in with Mike, watch him play the show, The Witches of Eastwick. And honestly, the setup he had in there, it was like flying an aircraft. There was a full drum kit, there were 3 rototoms, there were 2 triangles, 2 cowbells, 4 wood blocks, a load of auxiliary percussion, including PRT, the cymbals that you crash together like that were down here, loads of shakers and whistles. There was an electronic octopad with different sounds on it, and you had to make sure you were on the right sound at the right time. I'd never done any of this before, you know. Plus, the whole show was conducted, so it wasn't a case of you'd get a count in, like in a big band, you know, the guy counts the band in, and you play time. It's down to the drummer to keep time. This was following a conductor. So you had to move with the conductor. You had to keep one eye on the part, one eye on the conductor. Some of it was on click, some of it was like, you know, you'd be halfway through a tune and the click had suddenly come in, and then the click would drop out again, and you'd carry on following the conductor. This was stuff I'd never done before. So I went in. He'd called me up, Mike, and said, "Look, the dep is in 4 weeks' time." So I went in, sat in, and I said, "Okay, let me take the part home and do some work on it." And at the time I was living in a flat in Manchester. I didn't have a drum kit set up, so I had to kind of approximate what his drum set. I took loads of pictures of his setup so I could approximate where things were, because a lot of it was about choreography, about where to be, you know, on which cowbell I'm playing, and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And so I did about a week and a half's worth of work on it, and it just wasn't sitting for me. It was just like, I am going to screw this up royally if I do this. So I better sort of just phone him up and say thanks, but I don't think I'm going to do the gig justice, which is what I did. And he said, "Well, thank you for being honest. I'll see if I can find somebody else to cover it." About a week later, he rang back. He said, "Please do this. I've got nobody to cover it." It was like a Friday and a Saturday night, so it was 1 show on a Friday, 2 on a Saturday. He really needed the time off, and I was like, "Oh no, So what I did was I depped out my show for 2 weeks, and I just did 8 hours a day prep. I hired a little studio, took my drums down, all the bits and pieces that I didn't have that were in the show. I just took like a knife and a fork down and pretended that was a cowbell, or set things up just where they were. And what I did, which I know they do this quite regularly now in shows, that you get sent a video of the musical director conducting so you can clock all the cues and everything. Well, they weren't doing that in those days. You just came in and you watched. So I went out and I bought a really cheap camcorder, and I came into the pit and I just held it for the whole show on the MD, so that I had this on video. And then I got my VHS recorder set up at home with a little TV on top of it, and I played along to the conductor. I mean, there was a lot of swearing and bad language while I was practicing that show. It was so difficult. I didn't sleep for 2 nights before I first went and did my first one. I was so scared, because I knew I wanted to, at this time I was living in Manchester, I knew I wanted to move to London to try my hand at living in London and working in London. And it was kind of like everything hinged on this in my head. It was like, if I mess this up, I'll never be able to move to London. I will get a reputation of somebody who messes things up, and, you know. So I put a lot of pressure on myself. And literally, you know, when I went into the building that first time to play my first show, I was shaking. It was terrifying. And in the pit, the other musicians were all like my heroes. You know, there were people like Derek Watkins on trumpet, Steve McManus on bass, Graham Harvey on piano. You know, these incredible musicians that I knew about, I'd been listening to on various records. It was terrifying. And I was, at the time, I think I was 25, I think I kind of remember I made a couple of little mistakes, like really insignificant things, like missing the turn of a ratchet or missing the odd cowbell hit. But by and large, I think I got through it. But I was, like I focused on the mistakes I'd made. I was beating myself up about it. And the next day, the fixer rang me and said, just to let you know, everyone's knocked out with the job you did. You're right at the top of the debt list, you know. And it was just a wonderful thing. But the point to this story is that I think, you know, the first and foremost, the way I deal with nerves is, and you've got to remember, there is a difference between anxiety and nerves, you know. Sometimes people say, "Oh, I can't do this. I've got an anxiety attack." A real anxiety attack is where you're, like a friend of mine has a daughter who suffers from anxiety, and you know, she'll be throwing up and banging her head against the wall and having a complete mental breakdown. Nerves are important. Nerves show that you care. If any time I go into a new musical situation, I'm not nervous, that's when I worry. Because it's like, oh, have I stopped caring, or have I, you know? For me, nerves are part of the process, and you have to learn how to combat them. But if you've done, the first and foremost thing is, if you've done your homework and you've done your prep, you're most of the way there. It is terrifying, and also we have to accept that we are going to make mistakes. We are human beings. We're not robots, and now I try and celebrate mistakes, because mistakes are how we learn. I always say this to my students: if you go up on stage, or you're playing something, you're practicing something, and you're making mistakes, that's great, because there's something's going to come off the back of those mistakes. If you're not making mistakes, well, what's the point in learning? You know it all. Everything's done. So I think mistakes are super important. Embrace them. I laugh about mistakes. If I make a clam on something, it's like, I just laugh at, because music played badly is funny. It's a great sound. So it's a mindset thing. So accept that there are going to be mistakes, and they will come. Embrace them when they come. See them as a learning thing. Do your prep. Make sure you're 100% on top of the music that you're going to be playing. Everyone that I've worked with, like, in music levels above me, like great players, they're fine about you making a mistake as long as it's an honest mistake. So if it's a human error, great, shows that we're human, that's good. If you make a mistake because you haven't prepared, you haven't done your homework, you're drunk, you're high, they won't tolerate that. And you can tell the difference. You can tell the difference between an honest mistake and a mistake because of lack of preparation or something. And then there's all the usual stuff of making sure that you get there early, be warmed up, be ready to go. When I warm up now, I warm up hands, feet and mind. So the exercises that I do when I'm warming up challenge my mind as well. I have to think about them. I can't just go off into a zone and just be warming up my limbs, because then when I go on stage or in the pit, if my mind isn't tuned into the music or ready to go and ready to work, then that can lead to mistakes as well. A few breathing exercises, deep breathing, and just having a little word with yourself. Like I always say, when I'm feeling really tense and really nervous, I go, hang on, I'm playing the drums here. I love this instrument. There's no way I'm going to feel this bad about something I love. Imagine if you were a brain surgeon and you're just about to operate on someone for the first time. Someone could die. No one's going to die playing this instrument. So it's about, just having a little word with yourself and just making sure you're on top of the game, but accepting that nerves will always be there, especially when you're doing something new, when you feel like you're trying to prove yourself to somebody, when you're just starting out in the business. Accept them. They're a good thing. They're there for a reason, and it shows that you care.
That's amazing. Indeed, I think it's caring is the key to music, because if you do it, just for the money or for the fame, you're never gonna get there.
No.
You have to care and put all you got in it, basically.
Yeah,
That's what I think. You talked about students. I know that you've had a very cool teaching career as well as a performing career.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you see kids nowadays lacking in particular? Could it be like it could be like technical skills, it could be listening, it could be knowledge of styles, anything that comes to mind?
Well, I'm quite lucky. A lot of the students that I teach at the moment are brilliant. They've got the right mindset, and a lot of the time, not all the time, but in general, it's, I don't want to generalize about, I don't want to sound like an old man and say, oh, the youth. But they are growing up in a different environment to the environment that I grew up in. As I said before, for me, when I wanted to listen to music, I had to buy it on vinyl or cassette, and then in the early 90s, CD. Now, music is so accessible. People don't. I see people don't really listen to a whole album anymore by an artist. For me, and I get it. It's you listen to a track and then you're like, oh, what else is there? It's like when you go on YouTube now. You'll be watching the main thing that you're watching, but down the side there are all the suggestions of what else you might like, and you kind of go, oh, well, I'll check that now, and you don't finish the thing you're doing. Whereas, for me, if I bought an album, I'd probably spent my pocket money getting hold of that album, so that was all I listened to. And I knew all the drum fills, I knew all the lyrics, I knew all the melodies. It was because that's all it was going in. And I think that has changed, and I don't know. I think there are some good things about everything being so accessible now, but people tend to want things to happen immediately, and there is no shortcut in music to playing music really well. I sometimes the exercises that I show some of my students, they're boring. They are exercises designed to take 6 months sometimes to get you to a point where you can start applying them musically. But there's no shortcut. So it's like if you go, well, I'm not doing that today, I'm just going to sit and I'm going to play the beats that I like playing, and well, that's all you're ever going to do. And I think that's it's a hard lesson to learn in an age where everything is immediate. If you want to look something up, you want to know something, you go on the internet, the answer's there straight away. If everything's immediate. Music isn't immediate. It's a lifetime investment, and you never master it. You never get there. So that's one thing I noticed. The other thing, and this is more just out of where the institution that I teach at, potentially, which is more of a rock and pop style thing. I try and teach the students to be versatile in what they do. I'm always saying to them, look, you may have a dream of only being a rock drummer in a rock band that gets signed. Amazing. Follow that dream. But until that dream happens, how are you going to pay the bills? How are you going to pay the rent? Are you going to do that working in an office or in a bar or delivering Amazon stuff? Or are you still going to play music? For me, I never wanted to make money any other way than music. So teaching, writing or playing. So I always say to them, learn how to play brushes, learn some jazz standards, make it so that whenever the phone rings and offers you a gig, you can say yes. It would be an awful thing to get a call on a Tuesday afternoon and say, can you come down to a Park Lane hotel in London tonight and play 2 hours of background jazz with brushes? If you had to say no to that because you didn't know how to play brushes and you don't know any jazz standards, that could be £250 you've just turned down, which if you're working in a bar, you probably have to work a week and a half to make £250 rather than one Tuesday. There's no sense in that to me. But you get some pushback, and some students say, well, I hate jazz and I hate this, I only like this. And it's like, okay, well that's fine. but you're buying a lottery ticket there that you are going to be a successful one-trick pony, and it's a hard thing. But yeah, I think again, as I say, the students I've got at the moment are all embracing that idea, and it's something that I've always preached about. I mean, I can only teach based on my own experiences and the mistakes I've made and the things that I've done. But of course, I grew up in a very different era, of no internet, no social media, no digital really. So I get what happens and why young students are the way they are now. But you do get, I mean, let's be clear, if everyone was the same and everyone had that kind of discipline to do that, then there'd be less work for you and me, Alessandro. So it's best to keep doing what
Yes, yes, that's true. Like you said something really cool and talked about versatility, which is also something that I always try to achieve with my playing. I don't know if I manage successfully, but trying at least. But as I know you, I do know that you are basically amazing at everything you play. All the styles sound quite authentic, right? What do you think is the trick to being able to be authentic in all the styles that you play?
Listening. That's it. It's listening. So you're
straight to the source.
Yeah, you're Italian, right? You obviously started learning Italian in Italy when you were young. How old were you when you started learning English? Sorry.
Probably around 6 or 7.
6 or 7. You started learning English at school, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
When was the first time you came over to England?
I was probably 15.
15, yeah. Okay. And how long were you over for then? Like, was it a holiday or something?
2 weeks. We organize in Italy. Actually, it's a common thing to organize like a 2-week camp to come to England and learn English. You do like lessons in the morning and then activities in the afternoons.
Great. And I bet your English got way better after those 2 weeks. And then when you moved over here, you were in your mid-20s when you moved over, weren't you?
Yes.
Yeah, so your English will have skyrocketed because you are surrounding yourself with English people who are all talking English. That's the same with music. If you want to learn, I get a lot of students come to me that want to learn to play jazz, and they've come from a straight kind of funk, soul, pop background or rock, and they want to learn to play jazz. And I'm like, okay, so how much jazz have you listened to? None. Right, that's your homework. Go and immerse yourself and listen to that music, not to start with an analytical ear, but just to have it there in the background. When you moved to England, you weren't listening to every conversation in a pub and going, well, what are they saying there? It's around you.
Yeah.
So
it's like absorbing it from outside.
So if I wanted to, for me, I remember my mum telling me that, I would fall asleep. I used to have a little Sony Walkman cassette player with headphones, and I used to fall asleep every night listening to Buddy Rich, to Phil Collins, to all the latest. I'd just literally fall asleep, and I'd wake up in the morning. The batteries on the Walkman had gone dead. And I was tangled up in my headphones, but. Honestly, constant music. So if there's ever a new style of music that I want to get into, then it's having it on in the kitchen while I'm cooking. It's having it on while I'm driving. And there will be a time where I'm sitting down analysing it and what's happening there, and But listening is the only way. That is how you. Because anyone can sit there and, if they want to learn jazz, and go ting ting to ting ting to ting, but it's so much more than that. There's only so much you can do learning it out of a book. You can learn the coordination or independence exercises that are necessary. You can learn the parts that each of the limbs play, but you're not going to be able to go out and do a jazz gig doing that.
It's a language, isn't it? It's like learning all these difficult words but not knowing how to use them.
Yeah. So I think, and then on top of that, a big part of it was learning to read as well. And again, that's another sometimes a pushback from the more contemporary drummers, students that I have who don't, I don't read. I don't want to learn to read. And again, I understand that that was a bit of a fear myself when I was that age, because reading makes it academic all of a sudden. But I would say 75% of the work I do and have done has involved me needing to be able to read. So, but I think seeing it on the page, looking at it on the page, listening to a style of music, and then sitting down and playing it, and just letting yourself go and doing it, those are the ways to get, let's be clear, there are certain types of music that I wouldn't put myself out there to play. If somebody called me and said, we're looking for a death metal thrash drummer, I'm not your guy, but I've got a few things down with the double pedal. I could probably ham fist my way through something that was heavier in style. I love playing rock music. I really enjoy playing rock music. But I've listened to a lot of rock music,
Yeah.
So that's what you do. Let's be clear, you can't get good at everything. Everyone, I think most people who know me know that my first passion was always big band and jazz. And
Yeah.
But the only one guy I'd say that has kind of nailed everything is Vinny, and he's a bit of a freak of nature. So
Yeah. You mentioned, Phil Collins.
Yeah.
I know that you also were able to play for him. Can you, tell us a bit about that experience, how it felt, how it was? Were you, like a fan as well?
Oh yeah. I guess when I first started dipping away when I was a kid from the jazz thing and starting to listen to more modern pop music and whatnot. Phil was one of the first artists I listened to. I had all those early solo albums, No Jacket Required, Face Value, But Seriously. Listened to those albums to death, and then through that, obviously got into Genesis, but the more kind of 80s and 90s Genesis. It's only kind of later on that I went back and listened to the early Genesis stuff when Phil was just the drummer, not the singer. But I always loved Phil's singing voice, but then when I realised that he was a drummer as well, it was like, oh my God, So yeah, absolutely, I was a fan. And then, yeah, the gig came through a good pal of mine, Bob Knight, who is a great drummer, a great fixer, well, really busy fixer. Man, he's doing a lot of stuff. And normally, obviously, being a drummer himself, he would put himself on a gig like that. Why wouldn't he? He's Phil Collins. But he had a thing in the same studio that day that he was doing a thing with Sting. Sting was doing the Graham Norton show, I think, and I was doing the Jonathan Ross show with Phil Collins. And we sort of met in the canteen, Bob and I, and we were like, "My God, this is like going back to the 1980s." So yeah, that call came in from Bob, and yeah, what you're going to do? You're gonna. It's just a dream come true, So I got there early, and he'd brought across with him his guitarist and keyboard player MD, and I'd seen those guys on all the DVDs, So again, I was a bit starstruck by it all, and then we were in the studio, and I was kind of warming up on the drums, and Phil sort of came over to introduce himself, and what do you say to somebody like that?
Legend.
What was great was after I'd done all the platitudes, we just started talking about drums, because he at this time, this was, I don't know, 6-7 years ago now, he'd stopped playing because he'd injured himself. He can't play anymore, and he was saying he was really missing it, but he was asking who I listened to and who I was into, and talking about Buddy Rich, and he was a big Buddy Rich fan, and he was just lovely, and we just did the one track, which was Against All Odds, and then I had another brief chat with him afterwards. Yeah, in that situation, you just want to do the best job you can, because you want their approval, and you want them to recognise that you care about their music, which I of course did, and do. But yeah, Phil was amazing, and it was a real one-off moment that It's unfortunate that his son plays drums, because his son did the last Genesis tour and the last solo tour of Phil, you know, so I didn't stand a chance of getting that gig.
Yeah. Well, you managed to play with him at least once, so
Absolutely.
it's a great you know, tick in the box.
Very much so, yeah.
You know, from our conversation, there's a common thing that keeps coming up, which is caring and love for music. You know, over the years, by observing you and, you know, dapping for you and going out together, I can see how much you still love music. Like whenever you talk about drums and music, your face lights up, right?
Yeah.
What do you think is the trick? Like how did you manage not to let the industry ruin this love for music? You know?
That's a good question. I mean, there are days when, well, let's be clear, I never hate music, but I hate the music industry. and I separate the two. One is the business, one is the art. Art, how could anyone hate art? I can't get my head around people who don't listen to music or don't get me. You know, you'll put something on, you're in a car with somebody, you say, oh, listen to this bit, and they'll go, what? And you're like, oh, you're missing out. Everyone's different, let's be clear. You know, somebody might look at an incredible painting and say, look at the colours, and I'm like, yeah, it's nice. You know, we're all different. But when I'm feeling low about the business side of it, you know, whether I'm not getting enough gigs or I don't feel I'm being valued enough or all that, it doesn't affect my love for music, you know. So you can be, you know, there can be times when the diary's quiet and you've not got a lot of money coming in, and you might go and play, or I might go and play a jazz gig down my local pub, or just play for fun with some friends. And for that time that I'm sat behind the instrument, none of it matters. It's just like, and it lifts your spirit. You come away going, this is why I do this. It's not about, yes, we've got to pay the bills, we've got financial commitments to stick to, but ultimately we do it because we love it. And that is a great thing, but it's also a thing that industry men in suits know, and that's why they will take the mickey out of us and bring the money down, because they know we love it so much, we'll do it anyway. And that's a real problem. But yeah, no, I think, you know, and that applies, you know, listening to music for me and playing music sorts a lot of issues out. It does, you know, if I'm feeling down about something completely unrelated to music, I remember when I was doing Priscilla, Queen of the Desert in the West End. I did 3 years on that show, and during that time I broke up with a partner, and I was heartbroken, you know. But every time I sat behind the drums and did those 2 hours, all of that went away. That was my kind of escape for that time, and that over that period, you know. So I would have 2 hours of playing the drums, and I'd feel better. I'd forget about all my heartbreak, and then that would last for maybe an hour after the gig had finished, and then I'd be back down into my kind of feeling sad, and then the next day or the next week it would last for 2 hours until I came down again, or then 3, and it was gradually, you just you know, I use music for so many things. Like if I'm driving home late at night, like I was last night, and I can feel my eyes starting to go, and I think, well, there's 30 miles till the next services. You know, all I do is I've got like a favourites playlist on one of the, like Apple or Spotify or something. I stick that on and I get involved in that music. I sing along, and that always keeps me awake. It starts the heart racing. It's like, oh, I love this tune. You know, I've got all my favourites on there. It can sort a lot of things out, music. And yeah, there's never been a time when I hate music. I just sometimes hate the industry and what comes with it, you know.
It's medicine for the soul.
Very much so. Very much.
I'm gonna say 2 words, and I want to see what you say about them.
Okay.
Spice fusion. I know you were probably expecting something different.
Spice fusion. Yeah, it's a good curry house, isn't it? So I'm going to go. We actually named that band after our favourite curry house. That's why we called it. And we're playing kind of fusion music.
Yeah.
Yeah, Spice Fusion. That's the band I run with my great friend and wonderful saxophonist arranger, Simon Niblock. We formed that band in 2013 by accident, really. Another good pal of mine, Graham Taylor, a great pianist and arranger, he was running a regular kind of gig in a place called Northolt, which is West London. It was like a hotel function room, and it was just basically once a month put a big band on. There's no money in it. It's just come down and play some big band charts. And I said to Simon, who at the time, he lives in Denmark now, Simon, in Copenhagen, but at the time he was living in near Portsmouth. And I said to him, I've known Simon a long time. He's a little bit older than me. Well, quite a lot older than me. He wouldn't mind me saying that. He's an old man now. He's in his 60s. I mean, good God.
He looks 30.
He does, yeah, he does. Annoying. We've always had a very similar taste in music. I'd already been running my own 5-piece band for a few years, the Elliott Henshaw band, very imaginatively named. And
it's still running nowadays.
Still going. Yeah, we did the Southport Jazz Festival a couple of weeks back. But I'd been running that band for a while, and the music that I play in that band is somewhere between. It's kind of Yellow Jackets inspired, Dave Grusin, David Sanborn, bit of Dave Weckl in there, kind of fusion, but not heavy fusion, kind of, but not smooth jazz, somewhere in the middle. I'd said to Simon, and Simon's into that kind of music as well, and I'd said, why don't we put a big band together that plays that kind of music, not swing, just kind of funk, soul, Latin, fusion, that kind of thing. And of course, he thought it was a great idea, and Graham Taylor had already rung me, my friend, and said, do you want to put a band together and play this Wednesday night in Northolt 1 month? So Simon and I got a few charts together. Simon arranged some of my tunes that I've written for my band for a big band. And we went down there, we just did the one gig, and it was amazing. We were like, we've got to do something with this. So we decided to book a studio, a place called Core Studios, which is in Acton. A lovely man down there, George, runs that studio. And it's big enough to put a full big band in there. So we thought, we'll do a demo. We'll record 7 or 8 tunes, and we'll have this demo, and we'll try and get some more gigs for the band. Anyway, we did a day in the studio, and we got 7 or 8 great tracks down. And it was so good when we started mixing it, and our mixing engineer and producer, Chris Traves, is a genius. I mean, he just makes music sound so good. And the great thing is, he's a killer trombone player and an unbelievable musician as well. So when he's producing stuff and mixing stuff, he's doing it with a musician's ears. It's just phenomenal. He started mixing this demo for us. We were like, we should release this. So that became our first album, Trying Too Hard, which came out in 2013, 2014, something like that. Obviously, it's in its entirety, it's a 17, 18-piece big band, which is very, very expensive to run. So we've not done a huge amount of gigs with that lineup. We do quite a few gigs with a smaller lineup, and to bring some money in to pay for more projects, we sometimes do corporate events and functions and stuff like that. But we've got some great singers in that band. My very, very best friend Miranda Wilford sings in that band, who's incredible. We've had Sandra Marvin sing with us. There's Ian McKenzie has sung with us, you'll often see him down at Ronnie Scott's with the Ronnie Scott's big band. Annabelle Williams, the vocal coach, she does all the vocal coaching for the X Factor. She's sung with us. She sings on that first album, actually. So it's been a great fun project. You know, it's a labour of love. It's not a profit thing. You know, you don't make money running a band like that. But the rules are no swing. You know, because there are so many great bands out there doing the swing thing. You know, doing the Sinatra thing, doing the Count Basie thing, doing the Ellington thing, doing the Glenn Miller thing. It's been done. It's been done brilliantly by those bands. We wanted to just do something a little different. So I'm not a prolific composer, but I write stuff for the band occasionally. and we do a few covers by David Sanborn, Dave Grusin, all those kind of guys, and Simon arranges all the charts, and we always try and get some guests involved, throw a bit of money at it. So on the first album, as I say, we got Annabelle Williams to sing a track, Ian McKenzie sings a couple of tracks, and we got Eric Marianthal, the sax player for very legendary sax player, who made his name playing with the Chick Corea Electric Band. He played a solo on one of the tracks, and that was amazing to have him do that for us. We did it all over the internet. We sent him the charts and the stuff to play to. He recorded it in his home studio, sent it back. Then about 2 years after that, we said we want to go bigger this time. We want to do something else. So the second album we did remotely, as in I recorded all my parts in my studio. Our lovely bass player, who God rest his soul, is sadly no longer with us, Simon Goulding, who's for me one of the best bass players the world has ever seen. I mean, just what an absolute star he was. He was the sound of the band, really. He did his bass parts at home in his studio. James Treweek did his parts at home, who's our pianist. And then we got the couple of trumpets to layer up the trumpet parts. Chris Traves, our producer, did a lot of the trombones. Simon did the saxes along with a couple of other guys. So everyone was in a different room doing it at different times, and we were interested to see how it would sound. Then we went back to Core Studios in Acton, where we did the first album with a 14-piece string section. We had a day of Simon conducted them. We recorded the strings live, and our producer again, Chris Traves, put all that together. And our guests on that album, or one of the guests, was David Benoit, who I'd been doing some gigs with. David is an LA pianist who made his name playing smooth jazz. He was one of the first artists that the GRP record label signed, Dave Grusin's record label, in the 80s, when that kind of music was like making a lot of money. And I've been a big fan of David Benoit for a long time.
I came to see you actually one time when you were playing at Pizza Express, I think it was.
That's right. Yeah. So I'd been playing with him when he comes over to the UK to perform. He books a British rhythm section, of which I'm part of. So I'd been doing his gig for a few years, and I suggested to Simon we get him as a guest on the second album. And he did. We tied it in with when he was over, and I was playing at Pizza Express with him. And Chris Traves brought a laptop and some microphones down to Pizza Express in the daytime, and he recorded his take on the grand piano at Pizza Express, and that went onto the album. And since then, Simon and I have developed a really very close relationship with David Benoit. So much so that about a year ago, David got in touch and said, I mean, David's recorded about 45 albums under his own name. He's got a hell of a prolific output.
That's a good career.
And he's got a who's who of drummers on those albums. Vinny's played with him, Erskine, Jeff Porcaro, Ricky Lawson, Steve Ferroni, Gary Novak. I mean, you name it, they've all played on David. John Robinson, most recently, J.R. Robinson. But David phoned us up and got in touch with me and Simon and said, I've never done a big band album. I'd love to do a big band album. I'd like to record it in the UK with your band. So in August last year, that's what we did. We had a day in a studio. Again, Chris Traves engineered it. We booked a full big band. We did it live. And we got, obviously, Simon Goulding no longer with us, so we got Lawrence Cottle to come and play bass, who is now a member of the band, and he's just another world-class bass player, one of the finest on the planet, in my opinion. He came down, and David played. I think we did 7 tracks, and that album is coming out in April, I believe. It's coming out sometime.
Amazing.
David's over again in April, doing some shows at Pizza Express with me again. With his small band, but that again, another massive box ticked. To for him to ask to use us as his big band to play on, and it's gonna hopefully do the band a world of good, because
Yeah.
it will get us out there to a larger audience, because he will release it and hopefully it will generate a little bit of interest in our band.
Yeah.
One great
Well
thing.
deserved.
Well, thank you. One great thing we did find, Simon and I went over to LA in January 2019 and to the NAMM show, which is as you know, a big music trade fair, very famous. And every time I'm over in LA, I always go to a music venue called the Baked Potato, which is one of my favourite jazz clubs in the world, and all my heroes have played there. And we went into there one night after the NAMM show to listen to whoever was playing, and they have a playlist in the club, a load of CDs that they play while the bands aren't on, and Spice Fusion's album was one of them, which was like, it's unbelievable, So yeah, it's great. It's like I say, it's a labour of love. It's hard work. It doesn't happen very often, but it's a lot of fun when it does.
Yes, it's amazing. And I mean, what's coming up for you at the moment? Like, do you have any cool projects coming up? Any tours? Any recordings? Anything worth mentioning?
Yeah, so I'm just literally in a couple of days' time. Well, no, where are we? Wednesday. Tomorrow I start rehearsals with a guy called Tony Hadley, who is the lead singer of Spandau Ballet, 80s band. I've got a month on the road with him. He's doing like a swing project. With a 12-piece band, so it's 6 rhythm sections, six horns. I worked with Tony about 10 years ago doing his full big band. He's got an incredible voice, and he's brilliant at the pop thing, but he's got a real crooner's voice. So we're doing a bit of Sinatra stuff. He's written some original tunes in that style. Plus we're doing kind of new arrangements of some of the Spandau Ballet classics like True and Gold and Only When You Leave, Through the Barricades, those kind of things. So that we start rehearsals in London tomorrow, so I'm getting a train tonight down to London to start those. I had to take my drums to the roadies place yesterday to drop them off, because with those sort of gigs you get kind of nicely looked after, somebody setting your gear up for you and all that kind of stuff, which was lovely. So that's the next month. Then I've got some shows in April with David Benoit, of course, he's coming over. I've got a couple of shows with a guy called Eban Brown, who is the lead singer, or was the lead singer with the Stylistics. He's coming over from America. Got a few shows with him. I've got some shows with a guy called Ricky Tomlinson, who is a wonderful British actor and comedian who was one of the lead characters in a sitcom called The Royal Family. He's doing a few shows I'm covering for the regular guy on that. And then in June, I go on the road with a wonderful singer, one of my favourite female singers called Lea Salonga, who is a Filipino singer who was the original lead role in Miss Saigon in the West End back in the day. And she is coming over. We're doing a concert hall tour with her back end of June into July. And then out with Leo Sayer in the autumn for a big tour, UK tour. I've been doing Leo's gig for about 11 years now. I love working with Leo. He's 75 now. He's got more energy than I've got. I don't know how he does it. But he, again, the people he's worked with over the years, when I was learning his music to audition for him, I was looking at the listings, and it's like Jeff Porcaro, Steve Gadd. It's like, and he's still prolific, still writing great material. But yeah, I mean, one of the again, big box tick, to play for a quality artist who's still writing original material, and the band with Leo. We have Stephen Reed Williams on piano, who. A wonderful pianist, incredible singer, and great writer as well. He writes his own albums, worth checking out. Richard Hammond on bass, who my favourite bass player, just a lovely person, just again so passionate about music and such a great musician and a feel to die for. And then Dave Day on guitar, who again fabulous singer, fabulous writer, unbelievable guitar player, great musician. So it's like, it's a dream going on the road with those guys and playing for Leo. You know, it's very lucky to make music with a great artist, playing great music with your friends as well. You know, it's rare that. So that's kind of where the year is. Plus the bits and bobs that I do in the interim. I still play regularly at Boysdale's live music venue in Canary Wharf with the Rat Pack show that I do, which is the original three guys that did it in the West End. The Rat Pack was my first ever West End show that I held the chair on. That was in 2003 through till about 2006, 7, something like that. So that's Stephen Triffitt, Mark Adams and George Long, who were the original cast of the Rat Pack. And they are the best. I mean, it's like you're on stage with the Rat Pack. It's brilliant fun, and we've been working together for 20 odd years now. So there's a great chemistry on stage. So I do that quite regularly, and some gigs with my own band as well, with my 5-piece. We've just done the Southport Jazz Festival a couple of weeks ago. I organised a little gig in my village community centre, my village hall. Which sold out, and like I don't think the village knew what had hit it. You know, had Lawrence Cottle playing, and John Wheatcroft on guitar, and Simon Niblock came over from Denmark to play, and yeah, we had a lot of fun. And Matt Steele on keys as well, who again one of my favourite keyboard players, who plays with the Brand New Heavies, along with many other artists. So that's great. We've got some shows towards the end of the year with that band. Still trying to promote the album. I released an album in lockdown for that band called Who'd Have Guessed, which is essentially the 5-piece band, but with loads of different guest artists on. So I got Gwilym Simcock on it, who's just... I did a session with him a couple of days ago. He, until recently, was playing with Pat Metheny. He's
not a bad gig.
Not a bad gig. And he's just an outstanding pianist. And other guests on that album are Bob Mincer from the Yellow Jackets, who I've worked with a few times over the years. Who just world class, obviously. And I was lucky enough to get Dave Weckl to do a double drum track with me, which was terrifying and amazing, and again another big box ticked. So that album's out. That's been out a couple of years now, but we're, again, labour of love. I sell a few CDs at concerts and gigs and that, but it's hard when you're busy doing the stuff that earns you the money. It's hard to take the time to market the stuff that you're really passionate about. But it's and
I know you're very busy.
Yeah, and I'm hoping
always busy.
Hoping that obviously Bat Out of Hell goes out again at some point. There is muted talk of it happening towards the end of the year or early next year, which, as you know, is a great show to play with a wonderful group of musicians, and so let's see what happens.
Fingers crossed it happens.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, man, I mean, I think this is a great place to close it. It's been a great pleasure having you. I have to say, I want to say it publicly, you've been a great friend for the last 10 years for me. You helped me so much. You've been so kind to me, and honestly, thank you for everything you do for me. You've done for me. You do for the drumming community, for the music community in the UK, for the artists you play for. You're just an amazing person, an amazing guy, and
thank you.
You're a great guy, honestly.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure having you on here as my first guest. Very special. And
it's all uphill from here.
Yeah, I know. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you would like to say? Anything to share? Anything at all?
I'd just like to, just say thank you for getting in touch when you came over. Obviously, as somebody that's had shows for a long time, the one thing you look for as a player who holds a chair is somebody that you can rely on to come in and do a great job when you're not there, and you are that in absolute bundles, and you played it just right, because I get a lot of cold call emails, people asking if they can dep for me, and do, if I've got any work that I could throw their way. You weren't too pushy, and that's super important. You nailed it. You said, "Can I take you out for lunch and buy you a beer?" Well, that's always you're always gonna get a gig if you do that for me. But
Now you're gonna get a lot of people asking you to taking you out.
that's the idea. That's the idea. So obviously, you know, I knew you were a great person. I knew you were diligent. I knew you'd do your homework. And yeah, you exceeded all expectations. And now you're doing really well under you know, you've got your own gig at the moment, and rightly so. You know, I'm just a bit worried that you're not going to be available to cover for me.
Always available for you, man.
But thank you. Yeah, you've you know, you've allowed me to have the freedom to go and do the other things that I do when I'm not on a show, and that's super important. And that's what I did for a lot of players when I first moved to London, and it shows with the right attitude, the right work ethic, and the right amount of talent which you have in bundles. You can do it.
Kind.
Not a problem.
Well, man, thank you, and I hope we can repeat this another time in the future. And
Sure.
in the meantime, keep drumming.
Yeah, always. Thanks, Alice. Thank you.